I walked into my local shop for a box of 308, and the suppressor wall was damn near empty. Word got out fast. After the DOJ finally admitted in court that suppressors count as protected arms, folks swarmed gun stores like it was Black Friday with tax stamps. What's up, everyone? This is Ted from Line 45, and today, I'm breaking down what really happened after that Supreme Court bombshell, and why it's got shooters, hunters, and first-timers clearing shelves coast to coast. Before I start, I would really appreciate it if you would push those buttons below. The subscribe button, the notification bell, all of them. This is not necessary, but those little clicks help a brother out. Plus, it pushes me to give you more valuable gun-related content on your screen. Now, buckle up, and let's get back to the video. You know how long we've been told suppressors are just fancy add-ons? Stuff that lives in NFA jail, needs a tax stamp, and gets flagged like you're buying an RPG? That's been the norm since 1934. But now, the same Department of Justice that's been pushing that line for decades filed a brief in Vandertook versus Garland and flat out said suppressors qualify as arms under the Second Amendment. That's not a rumor. That's a formal admission on paper in federal court. This whole thing started with pressure from recent court rulings, especially after the Supreme Court dropped Bruin in 2022. That case changed the way judges look at gun laws. Instead of justifying restrictions with stats or fears, the government now has to show a historical tradition of regulation, and when it comes to suppressors, they don't have one. The 1934 regulation had nothing to do with crime waves. It was about poaching, literally. There's no strong history of banning suppressors for public safety, so when DOJ lawyers looked down the barrel of that logic, they had to back off. I've never seen a reversal like this happen so quietly. But man, it matters. If suppressors are now considered arms, they're protected just like your shotgun or carry pistol. That changes the legal fight, opens up court challenges in banned states, and sets the stage for a serious shakeup in how we think about what's regulated versus what's protected. I walked into my regular shop 2 days after the DOJ filing dropped, and the suppressor shelf looked like it had been looted. No kidding. Usually, there's a lineup of Surefire cans, a couple of Banish, maybe some YHMs collecting dust, and all that was gone. Even the used ones. Guy behind the counter told me they had more online orders in 48 hours than they'd processed all month. And it wasn't just one store. Dealers from Texas, Florida, and Arizona were reporting lines, phone calls every 5 minutes, and online systems crashing under the load. What kicked this off wasn't fear, it was clarity. For once, the government said the quiet part out loud: suppressors are constitutionally protected. That flipped a switch for folks who'd been on the fence. Hunters, new gun owners, even dads who've been thinking about ear protection for their kids while shooting. Suddenly, they weren't looking at suppressors like risky, extra gear anymore. They saw them as part of the firearm. Retailers called it a 300 to 400% surge in demand, depending on the region. That's not an exaggeration. Some shops sold out completely within a day. Others started rationing just to manage paperwork flow. Online suppressor companies had backlogs within hours. People didn't want to miss their window. You had buyers who'd never touched a silencer before sending off Form 4 like they were grabbing concert tickets. It was fast, it was heavy, and it didn't look anything like a panic buy. This was organized and motivated. I remember being a kid and thinking suppressors were illegal unless you were some kind of assassin or secret agent. That mindset didn't come from reality. It came from decades of bad laws and worse Hollywood. Truth is, suppressors got lumped into the 1934 National Firearms Act, not because of crime, but because some bureaucrats were scared people would use them to poach deer during the Great Depression. Seriously, there was never a massive wave of silencers being used in murders or stick-ups. It was all based on guesswork and fear of overhunting. Fast forward to now, and that lack of historical support is exactly why the DOJ's argument collapsed. Under the Supreme Court's Bruin ruling, if a law restricts a type of weapon or accessory, it has to line up with what laws looked like around the time the Second Amendment was ratified. And when you go digging into early American history, you won't find any widespread bans or even real concern about suppressors. They weren't even invented until the early 1900s, and even then, nobody treated them like a threat. So when this Vandertook case came along, and the DOJ had to defend suppressor laws under that new test. They couldn't too, there's just no tradition to lean on. That's why their own attorneys admitted suppressors meet the definition of arms. They had nowhere else to go. This changes the whole fight. What used to be a maybe in court is now backed by the government's own words. While the DOJ's suppressor filing lit a fire in the gun community, the Supreme Court handed down another decision that same week, one that drew a line between accessories and unfinished firearm parts. The court upheld the ATF's authority to regulate 80% lowers and frames, essentially treating them like firearms under federal law. That was a blow to the DIY crowd. But it also clarified something important. Suppressors and frames are not viewed the same way under current legal scrutiny. Suppressors, thanks to the DOJ's admission in Vandertook, are now on legal footing as arms under the Second Amendment. That puts them in the same protected category as handguns and rifles. On the other hand, 80% of receivers, which still require milling or drilling to function, are now under direct ATF control, and they don't get the same constitutional protection because they're not fully operable on their own. This contrast matters because it sets a precedent. The courts and the DOJ are now recognizing the distinction between a tool that modifies performance, like a suppressor, and an incomplete part that requires significant work to become a firearm. That distinction opens legal room for suppressor challenges to move forward while unfinished parts face tighter restrictions. For gun owners, that means you'll still need a serial numbered lower if you're building something, but your suppressor, legally, just became harder to ban. That legal wall separating accessory from constitutionally protected arm is now clearer than ever. Not long ago, the only people seriously buying suppressors were hardcore shooters, precision guys, or folks into collecting NFA gear. That's not what's happening now. Dealers are seeing more first-time gun owners asking about silencers than they've ever had before. I've seen it myself. Families walking into shops looking for ways to protect their hearing at the range, or parents buying suppressors to go with a .22 rifle for their kids' first squirrel hunt. Part of this shift comes from better public understanding. Suppressors aren't movie silencers. They don't make guns whisper, quiet. What they actually do is cut decibels enough to prevent permanent hearing loss, especially for kids or older shooters who've already taken damage. For bolt guns and rimfires, they make shooting a lot more comfortable and safer without requiring electronic hearing protection. For ARs and other semi-autos, they reduce blast and recoil without changing how the gun runs. With the DOJ calling suppressors protected arms, people who used to be cautious about buying one are now seeing them as practical and worth the wait. Add to that states like Texas and Utah pushing back on NFA enforcement, and suppressors are starting to look less like luxury gear and more like smart additions to a gun setup. This shift in buyers matters because it normalizes suppressor ownership. When it's no longer just tactical guys using them, the stigma drops, and that's when real legal and cultural change starts sticking. After the DOJ's court filing, lawsuits challenging suppressor bans in restrictive states moved almost immediately. One of the most important cases right now is Padua versus Platkin out of New Jersey. That suit argues the state's outright ban on suppressors violates the Second Amendment, especially now that the federal government has admitted they're arms. Under the Bruin framework, New Jersey has to show a historical tradition of banning suppressors. That's going to be a problem, because no such tradition exists. Other states are watching closely. California, Illinois, and New York still ban suppressors for civilians entirely. But the legal ground they're standing on just got weaker. When the DOJ changes its stance in court, that opens the door for challenges across every state with a ban in place. Courts can now look at the DOJ's admission as a direct contradiction of those bans. Plaintiffs in these cases are arguing that there's no legal difference between banning a suppressor and banning a rifle. The Second Amendment protects arms, and now that suppressors are officially in that category, bans can't be justified under Bruin. States can't rely on outdated fears or generalized safety claims anymore. They need proof of historical precedent, and they don't have it. If these lawsuits succeed, they won't just overturn local laws. They'll set a precedent that can be used to strike down suppressor bans nationwide. Even with the DOJ recognizing suppressors as arms, you still have to jump through every single hoop the NFA throws at you. The $200 tax stamp, the ATF Form 4, the long wait times, the fingerprint cards, passport photos, Clio notifications. It's all still there. Some people are waiting upwards of 9 to 12 months just to get approval. That hasn't changed. The government may have backed off the legal argument, but they haven't cleared the path for ownership. What we're seeing now is legal momentum, not legislative reform. The courts are catching up, and the pressure's on. But unless Congress steps in and rewrites the NFA, or a court directly rules the tax and registry requirements unconstitutional, suppressor buyers are still stuck in line. It doesn't matter if you're buying one for hunting, home defense, or protecting your hearing at the range. You're still in a federal process that treats that suppressor like a Title II weapon. Groups like the ASA, or American Suppressor Association, are pushing hard to get rid of the tax stamp altogether. Some lawmakers have proposed bills like the Hearing Protection Act, but none of them have cleared the Senate. Until that changes, we're in a weird middle ground. Legally protected, but still regulated like a machine gun. Bottom line, this DOJ shift is a huge win, but we're not done. If you want real change, keep the pressure on. The paperwork's still on the wall, and we've still got work to do.